Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. My name is Cade Bonsall. I'm joined by my friend Andrew Duvall, and this is going to be our predictions for The Brave and the Bold. So, Andrew, The Brave and the Bold. This is obviously going to be the first Batman movie in James Gunn's new DC slate. And, honestly, I think this might be the project in that new slate that I'm looking forward to the most. Are you?
It's definitely one of them. I'm also really excited for James Gunn's Superman movie, just because I would love to see how he handles that character. But I mean, another version of Batman is something I'm always going to be excited about. So yes, it's pretty up there for me too.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I'm actually excited for what the story might bring us. I mean, obviously we don't really know much about the story at this point because it's too early on, but I think that we could get a really interesting story out of this because it's supposed to be about Batman and his biological son, Damian Wayne. And this could give us a really interesting father-son story between a hero and his son. And I think that this is the type of story and dynamic that we haven't seen explored in the Batman movies, specifically the live action ones. And I think that this take could be very fresh in that way.
And I completely agree. I mean, we've had a Batman and Robin relationship in live action movies before, but I don't think anybody will agree that it was done terribly well or interesting or honestly even really more of a father son dynamic. It was more roommates that really don't like each other but are just together because it's cheap.
Yeah, that is one way of looking at it. But, I think that the fact that Damien is also his biological son rather than just his adopted son might bring that type of dynamic to their, it might bring that type of unique element to it as well with their interactions.
Yeah, I definitely think that's something that's worthy of being explored and I think will be handled quite well.
I do too. And here's a question. Do you think that this could be similar to how Logan was portrayed?
um I think there's definitely going to be some parallels between the two because again it's a major comic book character and their biological offspring, but I feel like it's going to be not too much deeper than that of a similarity because I mean, again, obviously, we don't know a whole lot about the story at this point. Since is it even? It's still being written right now, right? It's not even been cast.
Right, that's right.
So I think, obviously, again, this could very well not be the case, but I don't see it going this way. I think a father son story backs with the background of a regular Batman story is going to be very different to Logan, which was a father daughter story set against a Western, basically. So
Yeah, yeah, I get what you mean. But here's a question. So obviously, James Gunn's new DC slate will have its own Batman separate from the Batman universe, Robert Pattinson's Batman. Here's a question for that though. So Batman as a father is obviously going to play a role in this movie, but do you think that Batman's sort of fatherhood should be a big part of what shapes his journey throughout the Gods and Monsters chapter? Or do you think that should just play a big part in this movie?
oh, I think it's absolutely going to be a major part of that because basically he's not only got to be a superhero, but he's also got to be a teacher and a father on top of that. And that's a brand new experience for him. I mean, I feel like they're going to probably have Dick Grayson at some point, but teaching a prodigy is very different to raising a child. And I think having that as an overarching theme is going to work really well and be a really fresh and ish version of the character that we haven't seen in the live action.
Yeah, I agree completely. And do you think that with this movie, The Brave and the Bold, I mean, we don't know how it's going to do it yet because it's still years away, but do you think that this movie could set up a trilogy of films, like a Brave and the Bold trilogy, or do you think that this whole arc should remain one movie within the new DCU?
It's kind of a tough one because I'm of the opinion that not everything needs to have a sequel or be a trilogy. I think some movies can do very well standing on their own. Plus, you always have the issue of possible sequelitis. But in the end, this is Batman we're talking about. This is one of the most character and story deep characters in all of comics. So I definitely think there's plenty to draw from, especially from this kind of portion of Batman's life and career, which, again, as we've mentioned a couple of times, hasn't really been covered on the big screen before. So I definitely could see it being multiple movies. I just don't think it has to be multiple movies, if that makes any sense.
No, yeah, that does make sense. Yeah, it doesn't have to be multiple movies. You probably could cover everything with just this movie, but it probably just comes down to what the fans want, and they'll probably want to see more. But we'll see what happens eventually. But here's another thing I wanted to talk about. So when it comes to this Batman being part of the new DCU with this new Batman. Obviously, since the Batman franchise is going to coexist with this, and that's obviously been portrayed, from the first movie and what we've seen with, the Penguin TV series trailers and everything. That's obviously going to stay more within the grounded take on that whole universe. Where with this, Batman's going to be existing in a universe with Superman and Green Lantern and all these other characters. So, do you think that with this particular film, The Brave and the Bold, do you think that this movie should explore the more supernatural and fantastical elements of the Batman mythology? Or do you think that this should be a film that sort of stands on its own in a more like grounded universe similar to the Batman or the Dark Knight trilogy? Because I look at stuff like, look at the original Netflix Daredevil show. That show was considered a part of the MCU, but it sort of stayed in its own section of that universe and it remained very grounded for what it was. So do you think that's something that this movie should do, or do you think it should expand into the more superhero and fantastical elements of the DC comics?
As much as I love the grounded, more realistic, almost crime noir Batman and I feel like this one maybe should lean more in towards the superhero, supernatural element for two main reasons. Number one, since this is going to be coexisting at the same time with the Batman franchise, the Matt Reeves Batman, which is very much in that crime noir style of Batman. I feel like doing the same thing would be a bit confusing and maybe a bit much all at once. So I think kind of steering more into the supernatural and the more fantastical aspects would be the right decision. And so that's reason number one. Reason number two is this first chapter of the DCU, it's literally called Gods and Monsters. So I feel like that's a pretty big clue that that's the direction they're going to be heading. And I don't have anything against that because that means I get to maybe see some characters that I'm a big fan of that haven't been on the big screen before, looking at like Clayface or Killer Croc. And no, Suicide Squad Killer Croc doesn't count.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I get what you mean. Yeah, I kind of do agree, actually. Actually, I really agree. I agree. I think that this should step into the more supernatural, fantastical, and sci-fi elements of the Batman lore and the DC extent universe as well. But, let's talk about just Batman as a character for what he'll probably be in this movie. So this is obviously a Batman who's going to have his son Damian. We don't know how old Damian's going to be yet, but we do know that Batman is probably going to be at a point in his career where he's more experienced. So if he's having Damian in this movie, we don't know how old Damian's going to be again, but do you have a prediction for how old Batman will probably be?
It's kind of an interesting one because, again, I feel like they don't want it because, again, it's not going to be like the Batman franchise where it's early in his career, obviously.
Right.
It just doesn't feel right, if that makes any sense.
No, yeah, that
Especially
makes perfect sense. Yeah.
from a timeline perspective. I would say maybe 20 to 25 years into his career. We'll say he started early to mid 20s. So this would be, he'd be pushing late 40s, early 50s, maybe, like still not like Batman Beyond age Bruce Wayne, but not as young as, say, the Batman Bruce Wayne.
Well, I could see him being maybe like 15 years into his career, like maybe around 40 or early 40s at least, because that is usually the point of his, like how old he was in the comics when Damian came into his life, when Damian was around like 10 or 12 or 13. So I think that could be like a good prediction of how old he'll be, at least 40 or early 40s at least. But I think that what's cool is the way that this could be good for having a coexisting Batman aside Robert Pattinson's is this is a Batman who we can have be a lot more experienced as compared to a much younger Batman. And I think having a much more experienced Batman can actually be a lot of fun.
Yeah, and that's something we really haven't seen for a while because honestly, obviously the Batman, he's early in his career, the Dark Knight trilogy, he's obviously we see the origins of Batman and he gets more experience obviously through the movies, but it's still not a whole lot of experience. I think the last time we would have seen very experienced Batman, are we talking about the Schumacher movies?
We
At
might
least in the
be.
live action version?
Yeah, we might be actually. Yeah. But then again, we also had Ben Affleck's Batman when he was at least 20 years into his career.
Oh, I always forget about the Ben Affleck Batman because he never got his own solo movie. to
Yeah,
tie into the
yeah.
DCU, even though apparently that's what a lot of people really wanted, especially Ben Affleck himself. But
I mean, we'll see what happens. I do think that having a more experienced Batman compared to a much younger Batman in the Batman universe is a good thing. And also because I think, a younger Batman shouldn't really be interacting with Superman and Green Lantern and all these different DC characters yet.
yeah, I can see where you're coming from with that.
Yeah, because he's just not ready yet. But let's move on from Batman. Let's talk about Damian Wayne. So, how old do you think Damian Wayne could be in this movie?
That's a good question. Admittedly, my experience with Damian Wayne is actually kind of limited, weirdly enough. My biggest exposure to him outside of the comics is actually the Injustice games, where he's presented as kind of a whiny, moody little teenager. So let's maybe not do that. How old was Dick Grayson when he became Robin?
Oh, I think he was at least early teens, at least.
So like maybe between 12 to 15.
Yeah, that could be a good prediction. I think, yeah, because it needs to be a point where he still needs to feel like a kid in order for that father son dynamic to really feel believable. I don't think that they should make him late teens or early 20s because then it just won't feel as believable, you know?
Yeah, because basically at that point, he's probably experienced enough. He's basically going out and being his own hero at that point.
Right.
Kind of like how Dick Grayson evolved into Nightwing.
Yeah, I agree completely. And here's a question. Do you think that in this movie, do you think he should become Robin in this movie, or do you think that should be a setup for the future? Like just have him be Damian throughout the movie, and then in the future, if they bring him back, that's when he's Robin? Or do you think he'll probably become Robin in this movie at some point?
I think it kind of all depends how they introduce Damien in this movie. If this is kind of a Talia al Ghul reveals to Batman, hey, we have a son together kind of thing, I feel like having introducing that and having him become Robin in the same movie would be a little bit too much too soon for a character. I feel like that's a lot of character development to squeeze into one movie. So I think maybe introduce Damien in this one, maybe have him start training with Bruce. And Bruce is saying, "Hey, clearly you've been trained by your mother in the League of Shadows, League of Assassins."
Yeah, it switches from time to time. It's usually a League of Assassins.
So at least I didn't call him the Foot Clan and get completely confused.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, so maybe like seeing that, okay, you've clearly been trained. I might have something for you, but tease that. Don't do it all in the same movie. I just feel like that's stuffing a little too much into one character for one film.
Yeah, and I guess it'll really depend on what the story and journey is for both characters throughout the movie as well.
Yeah, because again, we're talking about a movie that barely is in the writing process at this point.
Yeah, exactly. But we do know who the director is going to be, Andy Muschietti. And honestly, I think with Andy Muschietti's direction, just seeing how well he did with the Losers Club in the It movies, It Chapter 1 and 2, I think he could really do a great job with the character of Damian Wayne.
And I completely agree. Andy Muschietti seems like he does a very good job at getting good performances out of kids. I mean, again, like you said, the Losers Club is a perfect example of that. Good child performances across the board, which is miraculous. And there's nothing more awkward or painful to watch than bad child acting.
Yeah, I get what you mean. But yeah, I have faith in Andy Muschietti. I have faith in what he'll do with the movie. But, why don't we talk about this? So, obviously, with this movie, we'll be getting another live action Batman that's going to coexist with the Batman at the same time. And I think that when I first heard about this, I was kind of against it because I think having another live action Batman at the same time could be confusing and maybe kind of annoying for audiences since Robert Pattinson's Batman is still going to live on in his own franchise. We don't know how long that's going to be, but it'll probably be for a long time at this point or a while. But and obviously with this new DCU, James Gunn said that they've mapped out an 8 to 10 year plan, so it looks like this DCU Batman will probably be existing for a long time as well. Do you think that this will be a problem to have two different Batmen at the same time in two different franchises, or do you think maybe it'll be okay because we'll probably have a more less experienced Batman on one side and a much more experienced one on the other?
I'm tending to lean more towards the latter option again because if I was the man in charge here, there's many things you can do to kind of keep them separate so people don't get confused. Number one, don't release them in the same year. And number two, go with what we discussed earlier, go the route of okay, the Batman franchise is the darker, grittier, more crime noir or version. This is the bit more superhero-y, fantastical side. I feel like if you emphasize that enough, people won't get confused and people won't get overwhelmed. And again, don't release them in the same year because that has never worked for any franchise across the board. It hasn't worked financially. It hasn't worked critically. Trying to do that in the same year. Now, mind you, it's not the biggest pool to draw from, but it's still a decent sized one.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I think that from what they've said, they still haven't casted the DCU's Batman yet. And James Gunn confirmed that. He said that they're still far away from accomplishing that. But whoever they cast, and we won't talk about casting predictions because we'll probably be here for too long. But I think that whoever they do cast as Batman in The Brave and the Bold, I do think that he needs to bring something different to the table, that, you know, something different from Robert Pattinson if you really want it to not get annoying. Because Robert Pattinson, he brought something new to the character, and you know, each actor did, but he did bring something new, and he's obviously going to stick around for a while. But whoever they cast as this Batman, I think he needs to do the exact same thing not just with how he's characterized, but performance wise. He needs to bring something different, you know, to really make it, you know, not as repetitive, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I completely agree because again, that's another thing you want to do to kind of keep the franchises separate. You know, emphasize that this is a completely separate universe. They're not connected. It's not a multiverse fiasco. It's just okay. This is the Batman franchise. This is Matt Reeves's movies. This is Robert Pattinson's movies. Over here, this is the DCU Batman. This is the Gods and Monsters Batman. Completely separate.
Yeah.
Plus the fact again they're going with completely different versions of the character, which again I think is going to help kind of differentiate them, which you need to do. And then you mentioned that every actor has brought something different. I think that's also something they need to nail as well, because Robert Pattinson, he brought the kind of reclusive version of the Bruce Wayne and the rougher around the edges Batman, which is very different from, say, Christian Bale's Batman, which was the kind of stoic, still heroic, but definitely more experienced version of Batman, but also the more flamboyant and Playboy-esque version of Bruce Wayne.
Yes. Yeah, I agree completely. And I think that whoever they cast, you know, I hope that the world won't react the same way that they did with every other person who played Batman. Because remember back when Robert Pattinson got cast, how the backlash that happened there, all I could think was, wow, people haven't been this upset since literally every time that they've announced who's playing Batman. So that's probably going to be the case with whoever they cast in this movie. But I'm not going to react negatively at all. Whoever they cast, I'm going to be open-minded and I'll wait to see the movie.
Yeah, well, I think especially with the last couple of guys who have played Batman, they've all had some baggage that maybe people haven't forgiven them for yet and kind of were prejudging. Like Ben Affleck, he had the Daredevil fiasco from the early 2000s. And then Robert Pattinson, mind you, by that point, I thought he had kind of atoned for his sins in the Twilight franchise, but it's still what a lot of people associated him with, and he had to, shake that off.
Well, and remember, think about this. A lot of people didn't want to see American Psycho playing Batman, or they didn't want to see Beetlejuice playing Batman either, but they proved us wrong.
Oh, yeah, I know a lot of people back were not thinking Michael Keaton would be a great Batman.
Nope, not at all. But you know what? They all proved us wrong. And I'm sure that whoever they cast as this Batman, I'm sure that James Gunn will make the right call, and Andy Muschietti, and hopefully they'll surprise us. And yeah, I'm open to whoever they cast.
And just to think, the only thing they have to do better then is be better than George Clooney.
Yeah, well, yeah, I get what you mean there. But yeah, we'll see what happens. All right, guys, I think that's where we're going to end part 1 of our discussion. If you want to check out part 2, go check it out on the channel. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you there. Thanks. Bye.